Thank you. I want to thank each of you speakers and the organizations you're here representing very much for accommodating us and making yourselves available to us. Again, I know you've given us quite more than a baseline of information with respect to P3s. Let me give you something back with respect to Rhode Island's experience in P3s, and there are others on this panel who can elucidate on their own experience. But Rhode Island has really been doing P3s for the better part of 20 years, if not longer, based largely on some very thin legislative authorization with some creative thinking to fill in some of the details that you'd otherwise might expect in legislation. I gather, my question is, I gather from your discussion is that you prefer to work in communities or states that have some kind of comprehensive legislative structure that kind of provides the roadmap, standards, everything else that's necessary to support a P3 and potentially the financing of a P3. Is that, am I characterizing your sentiments fairly well?
Short answer is yes. You know, I mean, the protection of the legacy that you're looking to create is a big part of that. You're establishing a framework that will allow you to be able to pass that, the legislature, the ability to pass on that same authority. The predictability in the marketplace, I think, is an important part of it. You know, when you think about how much it costs to bid a project and the competition that that you're talking about, you want to stimulate the best and the brightest so that you can get those competitive proposals. If the thinner the legislative authority, the less protection there is. It's almost a matter of how much of a safety net you want, and so that's the longer end of the short answer was yes.
I mean, I'd only add one more, which is obviously having sort of robust legislation in place is absolutely sort of required. But it's what goes on after that in terms of the procurement guidelines, because again, each of the potentials of bidders is actually going to say, okay, so how fair, transparent, objective and so on is this procurement going to be? So it's important to actually, if you're showing will, it's one of those sort of key indicators that said they've got legislation in place, that's great. Now, is this being turned into procurement guidelines, which is telling us there's something coming down the track?
And if I could add to that, the long-term dimension of this, the transparency and the competitiveness of going out into the market and getting your appropriate partner, we have to live in this community for the next 40-odd years. If it's viewed that we got here inappropriately, we've got 40 years of people who are going to nick us to death, right? So we'd rather not win a project where it wasn't clear, how did those guys show up, right? We want it to be a really tough competition, real clear sense of evaluation criteria that then says, these are the folks that met the challenge laid out by the government best, because that's in our interest for you to provide that for us. I want to leave opportunity for others to ask questions as well, but obviously we do that in the RFP and the other procurement documents. We'll provide that level of detail. Is that sufficient for you, even with a thin layer of legislative authority? You like that? Robust legislation, absolutely. You have to start with that.
I can characterize ours as, I can boil it down to about 5 words. We can alternatively procure projects such as the ones we've been talking about based on the lowest evaluated bid price, which is in the best interest of the procuring authority. We've stuffed a lot into the term evaluated. Again, based on that, we have developed these RFP documents.
I'll defer to John.
I appreciate the nimbleness that you've managed to exhibit in making those P3 projects work through Rhode Island, but I can assure you that if you have laid out in bright sunlight, chapter and verse with lots of cross-references that have been checked exactly how things are going to play out, that quite frankly will reflect your reflection on the parade of horribles that are possible in a procurement process, that if these folks, and and I'm speaking for you for the first time in my legal career, that these folks are going to have in mind. They're going to be like, well, what happens if? And then they go, oh, they thought about it. That's going to increase the number of folks that play, and that brings.
It's all
them back.
about confidence level. I'll make one other. I work on the public side as well, as does John. And what I like to tell my so-called adversaries on the other side of the table is say, we need to sit on the same side of the table. I need to understand as much about your needs as limitations as you do about mine. And that's the way we're going to go about this procurement and the negotiation. I'm sorry, did I interrupt you?
I was just going to say, sounds like you're a P3 lawyer.
Another issue that often comes up with respect to privatization is that does this open the door for only large companies now to come in and work in Rhode Island, bringing in, to the detriment of the local economy, workforce, companies. I have my own experience with that. I don't want to answer for you, so I'd like to hear how you engage and how you turn what these are very expensive public works projects into hopefully economic development projects with some real local impact.
The absolute only practical way, only a fool would approach a P3 in a jurisdiction, a new jurisdiction, without rounding his team out with his or her team out with local contractors and local businesses. You have to have that local element in the process, both to keep touch with your the political forces behind the project, keep touch of marketplaces, ensure labor tranquility, make sure that your partner contractors have a sense that they're part of the problem or part of the new project and not a victim of that. And that's absolutely been our mantra all around the country, and it certainly will be the case here, as well as the other competitors, I'm sure.
That's also true during the operating period.
Yes. Yeah.
I'll just footnote on this again on the public side, but my observation from very particular, real, practical procurement situations that I've encountered, I've watched someone say, not only for these extremely valuable reasons, but if I pull someone from here to here, I have the transportation costs, the housing costs, the difference in, and those are costs that make their bids less competitive. So I'm not going to go. I'm going to go almost as far as to say, not only is it foolish for the reasons you stated, but it doesn't make economic sense.
And that's actually one of the driving factors behind a number of high-profile P3s. Joe mentioned the Port Miami Tunnel, the direct, indirect, and induced job creation from that, well north of 75%. Construction's a local sport, right? There are no virtual excavators going on beyond the modeling, as depicted earlier. But at the end of the day, that bulldozer's moving, Rhode Island dirt, and it takes somebody sitting in that seat to make that happen. And as you often find at a job site, there's a number of companies' logos on the back of that, and they're the companies who participate in that special purpose entity in the design build joint venture. It's not unusual to see that more than this is the company I came from jacket. It's the safety vest that represents the whole team, and it's important to be able to highlight that.
Yeah, I might also add that it also includes participation in the equity group that gets arranged to compete on the deal. I can give you a number of examples. One is the Dallas Police and Fire Pension Fund system is an investor in the local toll roads around the Dallas metropolitan area. So we very much encourage those kinds of things. It's the right thing to do for the community. It's also the smart business for our side of that.
And if I could just add one quick point on, when we did an analysis of the companion bills that were presented in the last session here in Rhode Island, it talks specifically to transportation. That is one of the recommendations. A best practices recommendation is that there, if you'll pardon the expression, a made in Rhode Island clause that could be introduced that would allow for local hiring to. And it's not always just a stipulation of a certain number, But it oftentimes, and to your point about the, can you just capture this in the procurement documentation? You know, if you make part of the evaluation criteria for, you know, how you're going to judge one proposal, you know, compared to another, you know, how much local hiring, you know, is there? It's less about demanding a physical presence in the state as it is commanding a local presence that has the real economic, you know, benefit to it, the direct, indirect, and induced job growth. And that's a big part of that. You know, you think about projects like the Rapid Bridge Replacement Program in Pennsylvania, that was one of the evaluation criteria that made the difference on a razor-thin margin in differentiating bids. That was a big part of that razor-thin margin.
Excuse me.
Oh, I'm sorry. John, if you...
Doesn't that run afoul of federal highway regulations?
I was going to say something about that. That's
It does.
part of the there's local hiring
Question.
preferences are tricky depending upon how it is that you intend to think about how you're going to finance your project. So, but I'm going to use that. You're right. Your intuitions are spot on. So, yeah, you have to decide how your revenue stream is going to drive your selection criteria, which is part of the front end work. That when you roll out your project to the private sector, you're very forthcoming with that. Hey guys, this is a federalized deal. I can't do a Rhode Island, you know, you need to hire Rhode Island people. That may not play well with the local folks, but that may be one thing that you counterweight with other things if you want to deliver the project. I'm going to venture to guess that being forthcoming with that information is useful to you as you form whether or not to bid and when you do bid, just to come right out with it.
John?
You know, one of the issues we're going to have coming down the road is really this process, the education process to the public as to how the public understands what we're trying to do and why. Because again, this is different. Does either NCPP or AIAI do you do any kind of local workshops? Do you do anything like that? As I recall, you used to, I think.
We work together. I would like to say that I'm wearing my NCPPP hat. The answer is yes. And frankly, that's where Sean and I actually got to rekindle our relationship not too long ago. NCPPP runs boot camps. They're intended to be fairly intimate affairs, and everything that I gave you in 20 minutes would be about an hour, and there'd be about 4 other hours worth of information that talks through procurements and negotiations and so forth. But yes, that is something that NCPPP offers. That is one facet of, I think, what would be a very appropriate 3-dimensional strategy on education. And I know for a fact that AIAI brings perspective that NCPPP doesn't, the benefit of which is that you get a 3-dimensional view about the P3s. We give groundwork. That's kind of our market share. AIAI has other things to add, so I'll kick it over to you.
And that is very much a part of the offering, you know, is to, the audience who's assembled oftentimes will dictate what the level of intensity of the messaging is. And sometimes it's, you know, Skanska has a very, you know, nicely produced 4-minute video that wraps up the entire summary of everything you need to know about P3s in 4 minutes of an animated sketch. That's one element of it, and it really helps to convey to people who don't have, you know, a deeper appreciation. By the time you get through a boot camp, NCPPP style, sit down with a round table, you know, kind of a format that AIAI has produced in a number of states around the country, in a number of markets. You get to really, you know, dig in pretty deep on what some of the questions are, and as often as not, it helps from the public perspective refine some of the questions so that you can ask better questions. I mean, we literally at the last P3 conference, you know, we had, I don't know, north of 150 people for 2 hours, and the whole format of the discussion were P3 questions, P3 answers. And that's literally one of our offerings, you know, and you just put them out there in any way you can.
I was going to say, the third leg of the stool is they bring me in for a very dull, monotonous 47-minute explanation of what Skanska does in less than 4 minutes, which puts people to sleep. It's going to be helpful. So.
Thank you. John Simmons?
Yeah, let me just first start in the sense of being a partner that Sean had mentioned, since you'd be a partner to the public side. You've suggested to the public side that they should be clear in their mission, vision, et cetera, and what they want from the project itself. Now, tell me what since I'm assuming you're not doing this for philanthropic purpose, that there is some rate of return to the companies. What is the rates of return, not specific percentages, but where do you make your money, and what are the risk factors that we would limit or impede your ability to make the money that makes it profitable for you to do the projects?
Terrific question. The first best line of defense is to have a great legislation, great regulation, and a great set of projects and build competition, right? Because the more competitive we are, each one of us is a price center. There's the design, construction, operations, maintenance, and the equity returns and the financial structure. The more competitive it is, the tighter all that stuff is going to be. Probably the biggest challenge you're going to face with respect to cost premium are going to be those folks who say, hey, I can borrow today a 30-year bond at 4%. Why am I paying an average cost of capital? Let's assume you have a TIFIA private activity bond mix and a 10% tranche of equity. You might have a 200 basis point average cost of capital increase on that. That's true. It's important to think about, though, the cost to the taxpayer over the life cycle of a project. So think about the design, the construction, the operation, maintenance, the life cycle improvement, and the cost of borrowing. The capital cost, the cost of borrowing on average is likely to be, depending upon the complexity of the project, less than 7% of the total cost stack of that life cycle of costs that the taxpayer is going to experience. There will be a little premium on that line because our cost of capital is greater. But if we're innovating, if we're coming with a LaGuardia solution that nobody had thought about that gets it built faster and for less money, if we're coming in $400 million under the estimate of what a traditional contractor would have come in under the Port of Miami tunnel project, we wipe out that premium in efficiency gains in a second. And that's what you've got to think about as you're constructing it, to make sure that your really protective measure needs to be not on the cost of capital, but your cost of all-in exposure to the taxpayer, and can we provide you a greater value? And that's why you need, frankly, the outside experts to help you model that and think that through prior to launching a bid, and make the business case to your constituents prior to, and say, look, we could do it for this amount under normal circumstances on a life cycle basis. Here's the history of doing these things in Rhode Island. And then throw a challenge to the private sector and to say, we have no business in awarding this if you can't come in 7-8% beneath that. Then think what happens. Then you've got 3 finalists, 4 finalists who are all saying, I got to be under that bogey or they're not going to award the project. But I've also got to be the lowest of the 4 teams. And so frequently, that's where the innovation comes in, right? You're driving people to rethink it. This alternative technical concept that was responded to can drive that value. But
to ask you a question, then the others, so therefore you should, or we, as a public entity, should understand what our cost structure might be, the life cycle cost, et cetera, and then say to you, okay, here's what we think it might be, and your presentation would be, is we can do it for lesser. We're smarter, better, whatever you want to use it, or this is what we do for a living, whatever the term is. And that's a process that you would have.
And that really does get right to the, earlier John had mentioned the value for money, analysis. The flip side of that, the public sector comparator, is part of that evaluation phase that, to really lay out all of the cost, not just the first shovel in the dirt cost, or the cost through the lifting of the gate, to make that asset operational, but over the life cycle. And understanding that full range of costs is really what helps for an apples-to-apples comparison.
Mr. Bernardo has a question, if we could move on.
As a follow-up to the cost savings, is there any correlation between successful projects that go out with just a base technical concept and allow for as much ATC as possible?
Let me pop on that. Generally, no, and this is a procurement thing. This is where I'm on the public side and these guys aren't. If you let absolutely every ATC in, then you cease to have a procurement that they can trust is an apples-to-apples comparison when you come down the pike with who you pick. So there's And it actually plays into a bit to what you say. This is part of the partnership formation discussions at the beginning, is a lot of in-procurement one-on-one discussions where they give us feedback. We come out and we say, look, it's got to be the same or better, and we need 6 because we're only staffed up to deal with 6 ATCs. As a unit, all of the people who are in a procurement might come and say, look, hey, this thing's really crazy. You need to at least allow 10. And then you go back and you think, okay, is 10 going to put it to the point where I am unable to fairly evaluate and open ourselves up to people saying that we're not, we're lifting the veil, Lady Justice? That's the discussion. That's the partnership up front. That is having your act together in advance of going to them. So not a universe of them, but you would be foolish to say you only get one ATC and then not listen to what the private sector says. That would be an example of pushing a risk that doesn't give them an opportunity to innovate, and then the distance between what you could get it on your own and what they can deliver it is maybe 0. That's not what you would do a P3 to do.
Yeah, what I was trying to get at is you want that sweet spot where you get the LaGuardia advantage. You get, they tell you, listen, I want to maintain the terminal, I want to maintain traffic, but you're not telling them, I want 10 penny nails, I want,
Yeah.
You tell me how to do it better, quicker, cheaper, and deliver.
There's many of these projects, at least the ones I've been involved with, are done on the kind of the 10, 15, 20% level in terms of conceptual design, maybe a little bit more. So you're having people bid. You're looking for bids that are apples to apples, proposals that are apples to apples, I should put it that way. But you can also request alternatives. Innovative alternatives that are maybe to the benefit of the proposer, but also to the benefit of the municipality or the state government agency, and that save money, that are more durable, that meet a whole host of other goals that the agency might have. And, that can be the difference in one of these procurements as well.
We've had instances in the past where we'd come in with really aggressive ATCs, creative ATCs, and when we're allowed to, when they're accepted,
Yep.
we go back and we discover, hey, now I can look at this condition now exists on the job. It gives birth to yet another ATC. We've actually had third-generation ATCs that end up being really substantial because the ownership team has everybody in the room. They make a decision which you can incorporate into your design, and you have enough time left, and time is a critical component of this, that you can go back and further ideate. And to us, from my experience, technical one-on-one meetings, I agree there's an upper limit, but there's absolutely, if you do too few, it's very much detrimental to the process. But commercial one-on-one meetings for us that's where we physically sit down and negotiate the risk and the quantity and the value of that risk, and whether the owner can then say, I'm going to retain that, and that's going to be my cost, or I'm going to put that back on the contractors and run with it. So both of those, we've been in instances where we've had 6 of both, of each, and in one instance we were allowed 58 ATCs on the job. So it sounds like an absurd number, but it was actually very, very constructive. We were able to make major changes, and we actually affected the cost of the project significantly. Mm-hmm. It was manageable.
Town Administrator-elect Izofsky would like to ask a question.
Well, two questions, please. One, just help in terms, you've mentioned robust legislation and regulation. I don't know if each of you could offer us recommendations, not tonight, but just documents that you think that we should read, not necessarily a copy, but that we should read before we make advocacy for our own. And second, you talk about a pipeline, assessing a pipeline, and looking at your LaGuardia project, your Norfolk project. We're not New York City, we're not Miami, we're not even Eastern Virginia. We're 1 million people. I don't know if we've yet issued a $1 billion single agreement. I don't think we have as a state. So do we have enough in the way of opportunity to really create an interest in 3P projects based on the threshold?
Could be a series of schools, I think Chris described, that accumulate to 100 million or up CapEx value. That's certainly kinds of projects we've done before. Collection of wastewater treatment plants that might add up to the total. Again, we have seen a bunch of bundling of sort of more smaller scale projects to get to that 100 and up $1 million threshold. Those are absolutely possible.
Yeah, I mean, I would add that we start from the point of view, what are the issues and the challenges that the state or the city or the sort of locality is actually sort of trying to deal with? And is it all about the sort of horribly complex social challenges? And that's where we start from in terms of saying, is this actually going to create an opportunity? Every time I look at risk and look at mitigation of risk, I think of the opportunity that actually gets unlocked in sort of mitigating it. So it's very, very important for us to have these very early sort of discussions, being able to, to come in and sort of meet with officials and so on, so we truly understand what is it that you guys are sort of struggling with, and more importantly, what is the really key sort of priority that needs to be sorted out. That's where P3 and this opportunity to be able to come in and sort of discuss is so important.
Chris had mentioned earlier the statute's good, and then the guidelines about how you move through a P3 process. In many states, guidelines is an unsolicited proposal process where folks, thinking this through says, have you thought about this? And it may be that the pipeline is built by people who are interested in Rhode Island. And you would need an infrastructure, no pun intended, in place to be able to deal with them, vet them in a fair way, and then to be frank, to be transparent to the private sector, people who float it to you, how those will be handled. But I can tell you right now, Washington, D.C. is in its infancy on that itself. And a centerpiece of that in Washington, which is also a reasonably small geographic location, is a lot of projects that have come from unsolicited proposals to the district. And so the opportunity is there not only for you to think about what you need, but it's for other people to say, here's what we think you need. Have you thought about it?
And that really gets to the to the notion of sometimes it's an ideation session that leads to another thought down the road. So getting to hear at some of the educational forum that are have been created, to hear what others have done and across a broad range of size of communities, counties and municipalities. Both. It's not just the not just the mega the mega projects. I remember when the Goethals Bridge was first announced. In New York, it was a massive project, and at the time, it was great news for the 3 people in the audience of 540 people who heard that, because they were the successful bidder. And everyone else looked around and go, well, it's too bad there's not more by state agencies with multi-billion-dollar resource commitments to a bridge that works out that way. But indeed, the discussions around how creative that procurement mechanism turned out to be, it fits into the design, build, finance, maintain model, and it got other people thinking. And so a number of procurements have been issued where the revenue risk component of that, the toll taking and the toll setting, the fare schedule, is all maintained by the state entity, and it was brought about by the big mega project, but applied in a very different way. And then to your first question, if we may, I think, John, we both are in a position to be able to say, yes, there's lots to read. That we can make available. Some of it is outlined in the best practices guide that I think you each have a copy of now. And then there's model legislation, there's language, and there's recommendations around each of those provisions. And I would certainly count that as amongst the educational resources that we'd be happy to provide and to share.
Go right ahead.
On one of the Skanska slides, it said that it would make Rhode Island more attractive to business. How?
Where we start? I mean, back to the sort of infrastructure, and particularly sort of transportation infrastructure, the ability to be able to move your goods, move your people around and so on. more easily has got to be an upside for economics of development. I mean, I think about things like if you look at Southampton Roads and Port of Virginia, or you look at the sort of maintenance issues you get on sort of highways around Virginia and so on, but the impact on businesses of actually sort of not being able to either renew the infrastructure or be able to expand it does make a big difference.
Go ahead.
When you're working on a transportation toll-funded project on a long-term basis, how do you hedge your risk against a municipality or a legislative body saying no further toll increases? Well, how do you, I mean, I just don't understand how you get that secured for 25 years.
Yeah, well, I was going to say.
No bid?
That would have been my answer.
Well, you had indicated earlier that you find acceptable subject to annual appropriations, I gather, by municipal or...
Well, I don't want to smoke
Not
out
entirely.
my colleagues at the table, but my guess is they spend a lot of time thinking long and hard about what the actual risk of non-appropriations is going to be before they play into the game. And to be frank, sir, no further tolling. They're going to model that, and then they're going to find out if it's a go no go, and they get.
No, I'm not saying no further tolling, but the fact that you don't control the tolls, there's a legislative body controlling the toll rates, and it's an unknown for you.
But
So what the best practice is around the world on this topic is to have a contracted arrangement for toll increases based upon some index.
Consumer price index or something.
Yeah, so it might be 50% of the increase in the regional consumer price index, but you can only do it when you get to multiples of 25 cents or something like that. That provides certainty. The notion that you go before a regulatory commission on a regular basis would be difficult to achieve this good outcome.
I have, John, did you have another question? No. I have one last question in terms of your experience with cost comparison, savings as opposed to design, bid, build on the kinds of projects that you've been involved with. I've got my own experience in terms of what municipalities might save on water, wastewater, particularly over the life cycle. And it's significant, some startlingly significant, which obviously frees up other available funds for other projects, other uses, other programs. What's your experience? Have you been able to? I'm sure you've calculated that.
I mean, I don't have the figures with me, but they are actually well obtainable because there have been a whole bunch of studies done, maybe not so much in the US, but certainly Australia, the UK, Canada, and of course a bunch of more academic sort of studies really trying to get underneath this. But it is I think I was looking at something aside from the actual delivery of a project within the timelines, but in terms of being able to look at a public sector comparator and what's the capex on that, what's the cost of operating over a certain amount of time. Again, given the opportunity to have ATCs, given the competition that sits around this, you can 15% or better those are the sort of savings you can look at in terms of your capital alone. And then in terms of particularly for a DBFOM, is the SPV, the special purpose vehicle, so running the operations and maintenance, it is literally incentivized. It has to maintain, the very, very efficient sort of costing and so on as it drives the project forward.
So I think 15% is about what academic and other studies have pointed to life cycle cost savings on it. I might want to point out to something that if you hired someone like John to absolutely croak people like us, one of the things to be clear about is that we're going to continue to innovate over the life cycle of that property or that building, whatever it is, to try to make it be more efficient, to try to drive more earnings. Best practices are you retain a majority of the increase of that upside, right? That's in the document. So we've got an ability to try to squeeze an extra dollar out of it while meeting every single one of your standards that you've created. If we can, you typically get 30 cents on the dollar. He'll make it 70 cents on the dollar by the time he's done. But seriously, it is always, the incentive is always for us to do better, but you do even better than us on any upside that might derive from it.
Well, I think we'll be a partner.
Yeah, I've got one public client that swears that their life cycle cost savings as compared to design it, they bid it, somebody else builds it, goes back to that municipality to operate it, versus, the design, build, operate, maintain, is 35%. So, I don't know if John can top that, but we'll continue to compete, won't we? You're a guest. I know you're being polite. Listen, again, I want to thank you all very much. To give you some sense of, this was very helpful. I think it gave us all a much broader perspective with respect to P3s. I mean, we certainly have our own experience, but even me, my perspective has been broadened as a result of this discussion, and I think I've had a good deal of experience over my career. In terms of where we're going from here, we haven't made a decision as yet whether we're going to propose legislation or not, or whether we're going to propose specific legislation that may fill some of the gaps, such as protection of unsolicited proposals. But, we've heard what you've said. I have my own feelings about it, but we'll have discussions as a group. Our next session, which we alert the members, we hope to schedule first or second week of December, maybe on a Tuesday night. I'm having trouble with Wednesdays all of a sudden, which we're free up until now. But we'll get back to you with respect to the scheduling. We'll focus on a presentation by Matt Fair, who I think some of you know from my firm based in Boston, on the current authority that exists in Rhode Island law for P3s. Again, my 5-word phrase, and others in the regulatory world as well. Both on the municipal level and the state level, we'll take a look at some of the independent governmental agencies that are involved as well to see what their authority is. We'll have that discussion. We're also intend to invite in representatives of the various state and local authorities that are involved in projects that may be amenable to P3s. Find out if they've had experience with P3s, what their experience is, what they think the benefits or limitations are of the current legislative and framework for authority. So we'll invite them in, and we'll essentially see what their needs are as well, where they'd like to go with P3s if they'd like to proceed. So that'll be in again, early part of December. We'll take a break over the holidays. The legislature will be coming back soon enough. We'll consult with them with respect to, and among ourselves as well, with respect to the direction, and hopefully have more concrete approach to announce come January. Okay? But again, thank you very much. I know on relatively short notice. I'm glad if you can stick around a little longer, you can add to our economy. That would be great. Other than that, thank you all so much.
Thank you.
I think we're adjourned if there's nothing else. Okay, motion to adjourn. Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Thank you.